This submitted material is a fiery political commentary examining the ideological fracturing of the Republican Party, specifically focusing on Tucker Carlson's exit and the rise of the horseshoe right, interspersed with contrasting reflections on American culture. It possesses, a remarkably passionate voice and a deep command of current political schisms. But diving directly into the core argument, there is a major blind spot right out of the gate regarding historical context.
Yeah, the argument analyzing Tucker Carlson's ideological shift relies heavily on the concept of audience capture without fully addressing the historical precedents his supporters might claim.
Right, and the piece actually does an excellent job laying out the contemporary mechanics of this shift. I mean, it takes figures like Carlson, Candace Owens, and others on what it labels the woke right.
And it maps out how they're forming this horseshoe coalition with far-left commentators like Anna Kasparian.
Yeah, the author's central premise there is that this coalition is being forged specifically to cater to an anti-American or global audience.
Exactly.
And they ground this in some very stark statistical reality, pointing out that Donald Trump maintains a 74% favorability rating among Republicans, while Tucker Carlson is suddenly 7 points underwater.
Wow, yeah.
That data point is crucial because it isolates the faction. It proves mathematically that this specific brand of commentary is marginalized within the mainstream party.
Right.
But the issue with the author's execution here is that it treats this ideological pivot entirely as a modern, cynical grift. By focusing exclusively on the modern phenomenon of audience capture,
the idea that creators are algorithmically pushed into extreme positions?
Yeah, exactly, pushed to satisfy a highly vocal niche viewership. By focusing just on that, the text completely ignores the established non-interventionist wing of conservative history.
But looking at the polling data the author provides, this faction is clearly operating on the fringes.
Sure.
So as I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that this faction is entirely motivated by a global anti-Zionist audience. But is there a risk that focusing solely on audience capture might overlook genuine, albeit fringe, isolationist traditions within the party, making the author's critique seem less robust?
Oh, absolutely. Ignoring that history leaves a massive backdoor open for critics to dismantle the entire essay. When you write a persuasive political critique, you really have to anticipate the defense mechanisms of your target audience.
Right, because a reader sympathetic to Carlson isn't going to just accept the premise of audience capture.
Exactly. Their immediate psychological defense will be, we aren't captured by a global audience. We are simply honoring the traditional America First non-interventionist roots of the Taft or Ron Paul wings of the party.
Ah, I see.
If the author doesn't preemptively disarm that defense, the reader just dismisses the rest of the data. You have to strengthen the horseshoe right argument by briefly steelmanning the opposing view before dismantling it.
Right, so you have to articulate the strongest, most reasonable version of the opponent's argument to build trust.
Yeah, once you show the reader you fully comprehend the historical context of their position, your subsequent teardown becomes infinitely more devastating because, you've removed their primary intellectual shield.
So how do they actually do this practically on the page?
Well, they can use the reference to Michael Knowles that is actually already in the text. Knowles points out that America has grown less interventionist over time.
Okay.
The author should acknowledge this trend right up front, validate the classical non-interventionist instinct. Tell the reader it is true that over the past 2 decades, the conservative base has understandably grown weary of foreign entanglements.
Got it. So you validate the memory of the Iraq War, the shifting base, all of that.
Right. Then you explicitly contrast that traditional non-interventionism with Carlson's specific modern rhetoric.
Because advocating to keep troops out of foreign conflicts is a vastly different philosophical posture than actively praising the domestic infrastructure of a hostile foreign adversary.
That is the exact distinction the author needs to draw. The mechanics of the teardown require showing why praising Russian subways, or marveling at Russian grocery carts, or allegedly running cover for Iranian interests is a complete deviation from classical American non-interventionism.
Yeah, you aren't just staying out of a conflict at that point.
No, you are actively cheerleading for a regime hostile to your own nation's interests. To make this undeniable, the author could compare the normie Republican Tucker of 2004 to the 2026 version using specific policy platforms.
Right.
proving that the shift isn't just about avoiding foreign wars, but actively aligning with foreign adversaries.
Exactly, and that elevates this from a simple attack into a comprehensive ideological autopsy.
Okay, so at the first problem in this material is ignoring conservative history. The second problem is ignoring the modern reader's attention span by throwing in ancient theology without warning.
Yeah, the sudden introduction of the ancient theological concept of Amalek disrupts the previously established tactical political analysis.
Right, because the setup for this piece is highly grounded in the contemporary political ecosystem. I mean, we spend pages reading granular details about J.D. Vance, Megyn Kelly, the mechanics of closed primary systems in Washington, D.C.
The internal Turning Point USA drama, too.
Right, the drama surrounding Charlie Kirk's tragic death. It is tactical, it's focused on midterm election strategies, splinter groups, and self-deporting Republicans.
Very boots-on-the-ground political maneuvering.
Exactly. And then, completely out of nowhere, we plunge into a deep spiritual discussion about a 3,000-year-old virus called Amalek that whispers nothing is sacred.
Yeah, and the concept of Amalek itself is profound. It deals with the erosion of objective morality and the celebration of pure cynicism.
Sure, it's fascinating.
But placing it at the tail end of a pragmatic discussion about primary voting creates massive cognitive dissonance. I mean, the reader's brain has been strictly calibrated to process polling data and strategic voting patterns.
Right.
When you drop a Talmudic concept about an eternal spiritual force into that framework, the reader just doesn't know how to categorize the information.
It feels a bit like reading a granular white paper on modern election strategy that suddenly turns into a review of an ancient religious manuscript.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like.
Honestly, my instinct as an editor looking at this architecture is to tell the author to just cut the Amalek section entirely. It's a great concept, but it belongs in its own dedicated standalone Substack post or something.
I can see that.
Like, why try to force a 3,000-year-old theological concept into a piece about Turning Point USA drama? So I think the suggestion here is to interweave the theological concept directly into the political thesis early on, or entirely remove it to be developed into its own dedicated piece.
Cutting it is certainly one viable option, but I would argue that retaining it could actually make the piece transcendent if it is structurally re-engineered. The author clearly views this spiritual rot as the root cause of the political tactical shifts.
Okay, so how do they keep it without the whiplash?
Well, if you want to keep Amalek in the text, use it as the framing device from the very beginning. You have to move it to the very first paragraph. Introduce this idea of an ancient ideological virus that destroys movements from within by eroding foundational values.
Ah, okay, so that fundamentally alters the psychology of the reading experience.
Exactly.
Because if you introduce the Amalek concept up front, you are handing the reader a pair of philosophical glasses before they even look at the data.
Right, so every subsequent piece of polling data or political maneuvering involving Nick Fuentes or Marjorie Taylor Greene ceases to be just dry political trivia.
It becomes a modern case study of this ancient virus in action.
Yes, you are establishing the rules of engagement immediately. And to make that structural integration seamless, the author needs to explicitly connect the definition of Amalek, the voice that says morality isn't worth it, to Carlson's alleged abandonment of democratic loyalty.
Oh, I see. So when a pundit argues that putting America first means abandoning democratic loyalty, only to then seemingly side with Russia or Iran, the author can frame that hypocrisy as the modern whisper of Amalek.
Right. You bind the spiritual and the tactical together so tightly that the political data proves the theological premise.
Well, speaking of reader cognitive dissonance, that structural fragmentation we just discussed becomes even more severe in the second half of the material, where the tone completely shatters.
Yeah, the narrative structure fractures significantly when transitioning from heavy geopolitical and ideological warfare to lighthearted cultural anecdotes in sponsor reads.
The juxtaposition is just jarring. I mean, in one paragraph, we are entrenched in the darkest subject matter imaginable.
Yeah, parsing grim discussions of anti-Semitism, dissecting murder theories, analyzing the Israel-Hamas war.
Unpacking global terrorism, exactly. And then we turn the page and we are suddenly reading a cheery celebration of an Auburn tourist named Freddie tubing down the Chattahoochee River, eating at Waffle House, and diving into the controversy over the K-pop band BTS playing at the World Cup.
It is an incredibly aggressive pivot to lifestyle Americana.
Yeah, it really is.
The heavy, high-stakes political intro simply does not prepare the audience for the sudden pivot to casual debates about whether to set the AC to 67 or 70 degrees.
Honestly, I genuinely thought a completely different essay got mixed into the file. It is so jarring that it makes the author look slightly unserious.
Yeah, I totally get that.
Much like the Amalek tangent, my first instinct is to tell the author to kill their darlings and just delete the Waffle House and tubing anecdotes entirely. I feel like they undercut the gravity of the horseshoe right analysis.
I understand that instinct, but those American anecdotes are actually the author's secret weapon. They just haven't built the bridge to get the reader there safe.
What do you mean?
Well, the rhetorical strategy here is actually brilliant. The author is trying to highlight the sheer absurdity of elite political commentators who live in a state of manufactured misery, while everyday people are out enjoying the tangible blessings of the country these pundits claim is destroyed.
Right, I can see what the author's going for here, contrasting the doom and gloom of the anti-American right with the joyful reality of actual American life. But because there is zero transition, the human brain cannot process the shift from global terrorism to a guy tubing down a river.
Exact.
Let's see how we can strengthen this transition so the audience doesn't get whiplash, because I assume the suggestion is to create a deliberate, thematic bridge that compartmentalizes the geopolitical commentary and the cultural Americana segments.
Right, turning the tonal shift into a purposeful rhetorical device rather than an accident. You have to physically guide the reader across the gap.
Okay, give me an example of how that works.
So, after wrapping up the heavy discussion about the horseshoe right and their global allegiances, the author needs to hit the brakes and use a transitional thesis statement to guide the reader. They could write something along the lines of, while the splinter factions of the right and left argue endlessly over global allegiances, they are completely missing the everyday beauty of the country they claim to represent.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that one sentence changes the entire function of the second half of the essay. It tells the reader that the Waffle House story isn't a distraction, it's the counter-argument.
Exactly. Once you cross that bridge, you have to actively weaponize those cultural anecdotes against the cynicism of the political factions.
Right.
You use the European tourists, like Freddie going to Buc-ee's and marveling at the Chattahoochee, as a direct foil to the miserable political commentators.
Oh, the author includes that great detail about an Uber driver who is obsessed with a reflecting pool 2,000 miles away.
Yes, exactly. You compare that driver to the pundits who are obsessed with foreign regimes. Both the Uber driver and the pundit are projecting all their anxiety onto something incredibly distant, completely ignoring the reality right in front of them.
Yeah, and when you draw that explicit parallel highlighting how both of them miss the simple, profound blessings of American freedom, the 67-degree air conditioning and the World Cup segments become essential, undeniable proof of the author's argument rather than random tangents. You are using joy as a tactical weapon against the cynicism of the horseshoe right.
Yeah, it is an incredibly ambitious piece of writing. It is attempting to tackle foreign policy, media audience capture, ancient spiritual philosophy, and American cultural gratitude all in one breath. That is a massive payload.
And carrying that much weight requires load-bearing transitions made of steel. We've mapped out 3 major structural renovations today to help this material reach its full potential. First, steel manning a historical non-interventionist argument to make the critique of Tucker Carlson airtight. Acknowledging the legitimate isolationist roots of the conservative base prevents critics from just dismissing the critique right out of the gate.
Right. And second, making a definitive structural choice regarding the Amalek concept. If it stays, it must be integrated seamlessly into the political thesis early on as a foundational lens for the entire piece, rather than experienced as a jarring religious detour at the end, or, just cut it entirely.
Finally, building deliberate thematic bridges to connect heavy political analysis with lighthearted cultural Americana. By explicitly stating that the political factions are missing the everyday beauty of the country, the author turns a confusing tonal shift into a powerful rhetorical foil. We warmly invite the listener to implement these structural and thematic changes, and please submit your revised material back to us for a future critique. The raw material here is exceptional, and we really want to see it fortified. So remember that in the landscape of political commentary, you aren't just pointing out the jagged borders and the muddy rivers to your reader. You have the profound responsibility of constructing the bridges that actually help them navigate it. See you next time.